Hello and welcome to The Green Stream, a podcast brought to you by Sustainable Business Network Detroit, a network of partnerships between Southeast Michigan stakeholders, innovators, and changemakers. Each partner is on a mission to advance and amplify sustainable business practices, and we're here to learn from, share, and help activate a sustainable way forward for Greater Detroit. If you enjoyed today's episode, please like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Leave us a review and join the conversation on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. And head over to our website, sbn-detroit.org. Now, let's listen in to our conversation with today's sustainability leaders.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on the Green Stream today. And I'm really excited about today's topic and today's guests, because our topic is water. And we have three rock stars joining us today. Each of them are accomplished, passionate, smart, experienced leaders in this field that are doing amazing work. And I know that many of the businesses, and us as individuals, we all touch this issue. We're all concerned about it. We all know how important it is. And I think we have some idea of how much work there is to do. But I also think that today we're going to get some hope at about how much great work is being done, thanks to the leadership of these three and others. So I'm Terry Barclay. I'm the chair of the Sustainable Business Network of Detroit and the president and CEO of Inforum. And I'm delighted to welcome our three guests. Amy O'Leary is the executive director of SEMCOG. Palencia Mobley is chair of the Michigan Infrastructure Council. And Jim Nash is Oakland County Water Resources Commissioner. So why don't we start? I've had the benefit of reading your backgrounds and bios, but could each of you take a minute? We'll start with Amy. Just tell us a little bit about you.
Sure. So thank you, Terry, for the opportunity to talk with you and your audience a little bit about what we do at SEMCOG. And my background is I have actually worked at SEMCOG for over 30 years and started in the environmental field and worked my way up. And now I'm the executive director. I know a lot of people don't necessarily know what SEMCOG is. A lot of times we're kind of in the background. So SEMCOG is the Southeast Michigan Council of Governments. And so we are both an association of local governments. So counties, cities, villages, townships, intermediate school districts, community colleges, they all choose if they want to be a member of ours. So we have 186 members around the metropolitan Detroit area. But the other hat we play is more of a regional planning agency. And we have designations from the federal government, one in the area of transportation, but also in the area of economic development and water and air. So we are the designated water quality planning agency since the 1970s, actually. And we've been able to bring people together since then and rally around. And really the point is to work on issues that transcend individual boundaries. And when we talk about water, obviously we know they do transcend the boundaries. So that's one of the roles SEMCOG plays.
Jim, how about you?
Certainly. I'm the Water Resources Commissioner in Oakland County. Before that, I was a county commissioner representing Farmington Hills. I've worked with SEMCOG from the very beginning, 20 years now, and they've always been a wonderful partner in a broad array of services and the things that they do for the region. And I always appreciate working with them. So, my office, we have almost 400 employees. We work in every community in Oakland County. Stormwater is one of the major things we do, although not the only thing. But we work with communities all across the region with SEMCOG, Great Lakes Water Authority, all the regional entities. Of course, we work with EGLE, the Environment, Great Lakes and Energy Department, that is our regulator. Trying to make sure that the most important things we're covering are things like public safety and health, lead line replacement, making sure our systems operate and maintain it at the maximum level, stormwater, climate change mitigation and resiliency programs that we're working on to make sure we're building our systems to withstand these extreme weather that is going to just get more extreme over time. And all the other things around that, and plus getting off the fossil fuels, making just more sustainable as an operation. So those are the areas that we're working on most. And again, all this has to be regional. We're not silos. We're all together. We need to make sure we're doing this. The latest thing is this flood study that we're doing with the Army Corps and a region that's really needing this kind of study. We need to get our hands on what we're going to be doing for the future.
Yeah. I'm so excited for this conversation. I just have to say, everything you're talking about rings a bell. So thank you for all of that. But Palencia, gosh, you're the only professional engineer in the group, right?
I might be, right? I think I might be today.
Yes.
Thank you for acknowledging that. I am Palencia Mobley, and I am the founder and CEO of Mode Collective, which is a consulting firm that supports utility, government, and nonprofit operations. And I dibble and dabble in quite a few things doing that work. But I am currently serving as the chair of the Michigan Infrastructure Council, and I've been on the Michigan Infrastructure Council since it was created in 2018, and I've been reappointed 3 times, and I'm a gubernatorial appointee, so I'm a voting member. And a lot of people know me formerly as the Deputy Director and Chief Engineer of Detroit's Water and Sewage Department. I was with the City of Detroit for about 8 years, and I spent about 14, 15 years in the private sector as a consultant working for some of the top engineering firms in the country, primarily in Southeast Michigan, but have had exposure to projects across the United States. I love clean water, but I love wastewater even more. So I am the person who loves 9300 West Jefferson probably a little bit more than most people. I love the process of wastewater treatment. So thank you for having me today, Terry.
Well, we're really glad you're here because that's kind of sort of very important too. So I'm hoping we're going to get a chance to talk a little bit about that. But let's jump right in. I'm really curious. SEMCOG, I know, convened the Water Infrastructure Task Force that had broad representation to focus on the current conditions and sort of future resiliency, both and then the short and long-term actions that we need to have sustainable water infrastructure. You know, Palencia and Jim, you are co-chairs of that initiative, and Amy, you are the executive director. Please tell us more about what you're up to.
Well, I'll just kick it off to say that at SEMCOG, when we have a regional issue that we want to bring people together on, we first of all pick co-chairs that are leaders in the industry. And so when we said, hey, we gotta look at water infrastructure, and we started this work a few years ago and said nobody better than bringing Jim and Palencia to co-chair this for us, and to really look at some of the issues that were impacting us that maybe a few years ago we weren't talking about. Either we weren't talking about it as much or in the same way, and things have evolved. So we said, let's get them to run this and have a group. When we do a task force, we bring people from all sorts of organizations, from the nonprofit sector and advocacy groups, as well as government and private sector, to come together and really study an issue, provide recommendations that we then can move forward on. And so I'll turn it over to those two if they want to talk about what they found as leading that task force.
Go ahead, Palencia.
Thank you, Jim. So there are a couple of things, right, that we really talked through on the Water Infrastructure Task Force, a big piece being affordability. And I'll let Jim talk about that because that is Jim's thing, really. But the bigger piece was around coordinated infrastructure investment and understanding, right, that the water doesn't know boundaries, particularly when it comes to stormwater. We have these, geographic/political boundaries, and the water could care less, right? It is going to go where it needs to go. It is going to seek its lowest level. And I joke all the time. My mother wasn't an engineer; she was a nurse. But there are a couple things she taught me, and the main one was water seeks its lowest level. She had no idea I would become a civil engineer behind that, right? But we really worked with folks to get everyone's understanding on the same page, especially around funding. I think general public, doesn't understand that water is not funded in the same way that roads are funded. There's not some, competitive federal grant process. There's not this planning horizon where everybody puts their stuff in the pool and you figure out what's going to happen and how it's prioritized. You get that funding from the state revolving fund, and it's not a grant, it is a loan. And so if you cannot do revenue financed capital infrastructure renewal, then you are going to borrow money either from the state or from the bond market. And so really getting people's understanding around it and the importance of planning out what the needs are. Particularly on the wastewater side, right? We have communities that are combined sewer communities, right, where wastewater and rainwater end up in the same pipe, like Detroit, parts of Southfield, and other older inner ring communities around Detroit. And then you have communities that are newer that are separated systems. But what's true in both of these systems is that the amount of stormwater we see is much greater than we've seen in a long time. The type of runoff that's generated, the intensity of storms is bigger. So how do we plan for this? And a big piece of this is understanding what we have today and how to maximize its use, right? How do we use technology to better figure out the on-ramps and the off-ramps? So I make a joke all the time about sewers that makes general public say, oh, is that how they work? They don't have, on-ramps and off-ramps a lot of times like we have for like a freeway. So once the water's in there, it's in there. And so it's going to get where it needs to go. And in some of our systems, we do have things where we can store flow in our large sewers, but sometimes we don't. And we're looking at ideas around, well, where could we potentially store more flow? If a storm happened and it really concentrated, let's say on the corners where Oakland, Macomb, and Wayne, County meet, let's just say, it concentrated on those borders. What do each of us have in our systems where we could better manage that rain where it falls before it comes into the larger system? So we really, try to identify funding mechanisms as well as what are some things we need to do to be more collaborative and cooperative in terms of developing plans for the future that are more sustainable and resilient. Jim?
No, yeah, it's both those things are very, very well put. So part of it, to me, doing this task force is important in that we had these meetings with significant a number of stakeholders in these meetings. And we talked a lot about public education, educating elected officials, because when elected officials come into office, and even I'll have been here a long time, they really don't know how any of these systems work, even to the point of billing or setting rates and things like that. So we want to make sure that we're all pulling everybody along at the same time, because if you're not, you can come up with the best plans in the world and release them, and everybody's going to say, well, wait a minute, I don't know about that. So you're going to be greeted with suspicion, and if you're not pulling people along in that process. Palencia mentioned the affordability program. We've been working at that at my office since basically the end of 2020, when we saw that the governor was going to stop the shutoff moratorium. And we'd be coming back to shutoffs, and that's it was really a wake up call as to affordability in this state, especially in Southeast Michigan. So we started a research program. We got a significant $450,000 grant from Eagle to do a real thorough investigation into affordability and come up with a plan that we could release. We did that in September of 2022. Right away with the new legislature in 23, we've been working with Senator Chang, who had a statewide stakeholder group that we were a part of that group too, and they've worked in this legislation ever since. And I hope, legislatures can be a tricky place, but we're hoping it'll get passed by the end of the year. It would be set up basically a model of the MEAP, the Michigan Energy Assistance Program. It would be a $2 per meter program where everybody pays into that, and it would be a subsidy for low-income folks that would allow 2 or 3% of their income, family income, to be spent on water, and this would be subsidized. And this would allow both stopping shutoffs as much as we can and less costs around enforcement, allowing us to do more work in the long run for the systems we operate and maintain for. Because if we're fighting with people for income to pay their bills, then we're not being able to afford the things we need to afford. So this is one of those things that it's an offshoot, but it's very important to what we're doing in the long term. And beyond that, we have to work regionally, because as both have said, that the water doesn't stay in one place. It follows where it's going to go downstream, and we can't be fighting over who's doing what, as long as we're producing water quality systems that are important, that for the long term. So we have to be working together on this. Stakeholder groups keep us together in terms of local governments. Public education has to be a part of that, because the local governments then go to their people and say, we're doing these things. And if they don't understand them, there could be opposition to that. So everything we do has to be collaborated with, and we have a good history of that. We worked with Great Lakes Water Authority and DWSD a few years ago to do a program where we're building green infrastructure in Detroit to hold up to 100 million gallons of stormwater, separated from what it used to be part of that combined system. And in exchange, we get 10 million gallons extra a year going to the Great Lakes Water Authority wastewater treatment plant. Goes right by the city, doesn't go through the city at all, has no effect there. But when we save money by doing that, because we're instead of building a whole bunch of gray infrastructure, we're doing much more limited, and the city, they're getting green infrastructure paid for. So their water is cleaner, our water is cleaner, we're both saving money. This is how we can work regionally, and SEMCOG played a role in that, significant role in that. And part of that was showing Eagle that this is something that can be done. Eagle has always been more of a silo-oriented thing. Every individual piece has to have their own regulations, their own permits, but we're also working together. So this is how we can do that. And once Eagle got that, I think they're more willing to recognize that we can do this again and again and again around our region, to do that control without the extra costs and without the fighting, but collaborating instead. So that's how I see that this organization and this particular report really helps that.
Yeah. And Jim said something that I just want to double back around to, and it's around really staffing and workforce development, right? If we don't have to staff to do shutoffs, we're staffing to do more preventive maintenance versus corrective. Most utility systems across the country are in a corrective mode, right? Someone calls in, they make a complaint, we go investigate, we do the work. But if we have the ability to prioritize and shift work, we can do much more preventive work, which allows us, one, a better plan for our assets and to make investments for capital ahead of failure. And so, for us, not having to have crews do shutoffs, is paramount, because if you were sending out, and I don't remember what numbers we had in the past, but let's just say, you had a crew of 5, individual, 5 teams that were going out doing shutoffs. It was probably more than that. Those are people that could have been doing meter replacements when you needed meters changed. Those are folks that could have actually been changing lead service lines, right? Because in Detroit in particular, except for our meter staff, but for the most part, our field staff did everything, right? They could clean a catch basin, they could operate a fire hydrant and that sort of thing, but they could also change a meter. And so, saying all that to say, the affordability piece is critical. And being able to prioritize and shift work and do better workforce planning behind that will be great for all the communities involved.
One of the questions that I hear all the time from the business community, and you've really touched on a couple of areas of key concern, which is how are all the municipalities and different units working together, to solve the problem? And it sounds like you're just leading the way and doing some incredible work in that regard. But the other two questions that I hear all the time, it goes right back to, I think it was you, Palencia, who kind of outlined how we fund this stuff and, how the system is set up. And I've heard businesses say, is there any kind of push to come up with a fundamentally different funding approach for this critical resource of water, or is there absolutely no appetite for tackling that? That's kind of one set of things I hear. The second set of things I hear are, how bad is the infrastructure problem? I think people feel like there's just this ticking time bomb, and we don't have much of a sense of, how bad is it? Are you optimistic that we're making progress? And I know, Palencia, when you were working in Detroit, you made some incredible strides in speeding up, some of the infrastructure replacement. So I don't know if those are questions you want to tackle or not.
Sure. So I'll make two comments. Water generally, right, is funded by the revenues it receives. And in a system like Detroit that has seen such a drastic drop in the number of people who participate in the system, right, because we just don't have the same number of residents and or businesses, that changes the revenue profile. In addition to years of what we would consider bad debt, right, that just rolls into the rate over and over. And the more you didn't collect when it was, fairly populated, that burden is now shouldered by a lot of people who are still here. And so there's a lot of question about whether or not, from a federal standpoint, more will be done to push money into EPA, thereby pushing money down into the states to do additional infrastructure investment, right? But getting federal money does come at a cost, and part of that cost, right, is being able to administrate that money. So if you are a small town or municipality, you may not have the same capacity as someone like a Detroit or Great Lakes Water Authority or Oakland County to administer receipt of those dollars. The other thing is it's very competitive, right? So with the increase in funding that went into the state revolving fund programs across, the U.S., regulatory agencies saw far more communities apply for funding than what there really is funding to allocate. And so there are a lot of questions about other financing models for water infrastructure and whether or not more money should be placed into EPA to administer those dollars. And then, of course, right, utilities, I say this and sometimes people get a little, I don't know what word I want to use, but I don't believe there's a utility in this country that truly charges the rate it needs to charge to keep their infrastructure in an excellent state of repair, right? We have good, like we're good, we're doing good, we're going along, but this pristine brand new thing, right? Like how, you go get a brand new car and you drive it off the lot. No, it's going to be used, and that's fine, right? Because a lot of your infrastructure cost is fixed. I would tell people all the time, I'm not just going to go dig a pipe up. I may abandon it in place, right? I may figure out better routing, right, to connect, two parts of the system. But a lot of this cost is fixed, right? It's buried in the ground. It's been there forever. The plants have been in existence, right? Fully operational. Most of the plants that serve the region were fully operational by like 1960, right? So everything was built, ready to go, and has been in place. The thing about Southeast Michigan, though, twofold. One, there are population estimates that were done in 1959 when Detroit talked about expanding its system and how it would be economical and beneficial for the region, that estimate that the population would be 8 million people in Southeast Michigan at this point. We don't have 8 million people. We have the same 4 million people we basically had in the 60s. We just all moved further out. And so there are two questions here. How do we repopulate this area? How do we develop in a way that allows us to maximize the use of the fixed costs, right? The infrastructure that's already in the ground, right? How do we do that? And how do we continue to work in a cooperative fashion to do economic development? I always give the example of that Amazon proposal when Amazon was trying to do their regional headquarters. And the fact that several of the counties were going to each submit their own proposal, right? And we know that if you geolocate somewhere between Oakland, Wayne, Macomb, right, you can pretty much get anywhere in 20 to 30 minutes, right, depending on where you are in either of those places. And so how do we show that we're a region? And I think that is the thing that's going to push us further. We have water. We can attract everything associated with electrification here, right? The system that serves Southeast Michigan has a treated water capacity of almost 2 billion gallons a day. I'm not saying that's what they pump. I'm saying if everything was perfectly beautiful and operated at maximum capacity, right, that's what we could do. We use on average 500 million gallons of treated water a day. So what are industries that we can actually attract? Where do we have space? What's good for Detroit is good for the region. What's good for the region should be good for Detroit, right? And so how do we begin to think of ourselves as a metro? And I think SEMCOG plays a huge role in how they push that narrative as well. And they've been working a lot to get us all to see that the boundaries aren't important. It's how do we function together to maximize the benefit for everyone in Southeast Michigan.
So let me just add, Palencia, that's great. And we've done some studies as part of this task force and before and after that. One of the estimates that we give, Terry, is the need for $3 billion a year to bring just the pipes for stormwater, wastewater, and drinking water from poor condition into fair or good condition. So that's $3 billion a year. And that doesn't take into account, you know, the improvements that need to happen at a pump station or at a treatment plant, or dealing with the increase in intensity in rain events and managing those issues. So that's just for the pipes. So there is a need. And while investments are happening, just like with most of our infrastructure in Southeast Michigan, they're not happening at the pace that they need to happen. And so when we talk about the federal investment, which has increased with the Infrastructure and Jobs Act, the bipartisan infrastructure law, the money goes through the SRF program, the state revolving loan program, which Palencia mentioned, but by and large, the dollars coming from the federal government are loans. And so it's not enough, and it's loans, right? And so, and also to apply for those dollars can be a challenge, especially for smaller, under-resourced communities to be able to have that capacity to apply for those dollars. So we have had those conversations, and one of the good things that has happened is there is some element of principal forgiveness that's happening with some of the SRF dollars. So it almost treats it like a grant, which has been very helpful for some of our under-resourced communities. So we encourage that to continue for them because it's really needed. And the other thing when it comes to the financing side, and we've worked for, I don't know, 10 years on this, and so is Jim and others, is, you know, when it comes to the drinking water side and the wastewater side, there is a rate structure. And like Palencia said, it's often not at the level it might need to be able to be totally self-sustaining and have it all be at, you know, the best condition. But on the stormwater side, we don't have that. We don't have the real ability to confidently do stormwater utilities in the state of Michigan. And so Jim's office has actually taken the lead in working legislatively to try to pass legislation. And I'll give you the Senate bill number, Senate Bill 660, to try and really give the perspective of what would a utility look like that would pass the muster to be legal to do stormwater utilities in the state of Michigan. And when we talk about the private sector, in the private sector understanding our need to manage this storm events and these increasing storm events, we need the private sector as well as the public to support this need for this investment in the stormwater infrastructure through things like a stormwater utility. And right now, we don't always get that kind of support. And so we've got a draft bill out there. It's been out there for 10 years. We hope that we will get some momentum this time and that the private sector will understand that, you know, this is an important thing that we need to all get behind in order to be able to manage those systems. And in the past, it hasn't really been that way.
Wow.
Wow. That's just
And
fascinating. Yeah. Go ahead.
yeah, I'm sorry. And to Amy's point, I'm always thankful for the colleagues in Jim's office, because another agency was doing work in Detroit, but they had done work in Oakland County, two different, entities in the same agency, right? Again, we talk about things being siloed. And so Detroit, passed a stormwater ordinance to manage stormwater in 2018. And because they were used to not doing it in Detroit, they just kind of were like, oh. And so then I reached out to Jim. I said, can I ask a question? How did such and such handle such and such for you all? Right. And his team member came back and said, oh, they da, 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 da. So then I was able to take that information and say, hey, well, your colleague, same entity, right? You all are just in different working groups, right? You have Wayne in Detroit and this person had Oakland. They were able to follow, this, can you now do this? Oh, well, okay, sure. And so that's the other thing about us all having conversation and coordinating, is us making sure that we're holding everybody to similar standards. Because again, from a development perspective, it's very important now for you to manage your stormwater. When I'm no longer right at the city of Detroit, but one of my greatest joys now is riding around seeing detention ponds in Detroit, right? Seeing stormwater swells, in the easement on the road. Like, that is one of my greatest joys, is seeing that type of work get done. But this legislation is very important for all of Michigan, because there is no revenue source. I'm working with a community right now to map their stormwater assets, and very hopeful that it'll put them in a position to attain certain types of funding that they may become eligible for once they know where their assets even are. Jim?
Absolutely. So, SEMCOG has done a great job kind of familiarizing communities with this. That we got a grant from them back in 2018 for the George W. Kuhn 14 communities in that 12 towns drain. Never figured that one out, but we had them all look at their ordinances, their planning documents, to see how they could better include green infrastructure in all these things, whether it's residential, business, or their own, community resources. And with varying, degrees, there's been a lot of communities that have been significantly involved with this. Centerline is this very tiny little community inside Warren, but they really, some years ago, dedicated to how they were going to do that. Parking lot diets and bioswales and all those things. The great thing about a stormwater utility is it does that. It gives you that source of income. Each property is analyzed to see what their impervious spaces are. And then you pay by that rather than the value of the house or whatever you use for water and sewer. It's a more transparent way of doing it. Once you've done it, if you put processes on your properties to limit the water runoff from those properties, you can make the utility costs go down, so you won't be paying as much. So it gives you the funding to do the work you need to do, and the impetus to do less work because you're keeping it on your own properties. And things like what we've done at the George W. Kuhn, again, those same 14 communities, people within it, we have a rebate program for residential properties. So if up to $2,000 to put green infrastructure on your residential properties, this, it helps, it limits how much is getting into our stormwater systems. And it's part of it is educational. We're having these little signs that'll be put on the, the public facing storm drains. I mean, rain gardens and things like that. So folks can know why we're doing this. And it's little spots of garden. Who doesn't like that? It brings in the pollinators. It brings in the birds and small animals that eat the pollinators. It really is a helpful way of doing this. And when we do this as an educational tool, this program was it's a pilot program. It was supposed to be 2 years. We were hoping to get 150 people sign up to it. We've had over 500 people sign up for it. So when people hear about it, they say, yeah, let's try this. And those kind of things are how we popularize this and make it much more common to see. Businesses can get that payoff of lowering their utility bill for a stormwater utility by putting in these storm drains, putting in these bioswales and pervious pavement and all those kind of different things that we can use And the more and more communities are doing this, more and more businesses, big businesses like the auto companies, they have sustainability directors. They didn't have that 10, 15 years ago. So they're really looking at what they can do as a good corporate citizen to make sure that they're doing their part to protect our water resources. So I really enjoy how we have these nonprofits. The Herb Foundation is a really great partner in a lot of these kind of projects. So there's so many different people that have become part of this process, and I think that is just going to be growing over time. And collaborating and cooperating, it's so important. We did a stormwater ordinance for the region, us and Wayne and Macomb and Livingston all together. Again, another one of those things showing the Eagle how we can do this. Rather than doing it individually, there was significant resistance to that at first. And we've shown them that each one has their own things that are slightly different, but overall we're working in that same direction in a way we hadn't in the past. So that kind of thing, SEMCOG has always played a role in that, and Eagle and Great Lakes Water Authority and DWSD, all of them played a role in those processes, and we've just been better for it.
Mm-hmm. Oh my gosh, I just love hearing about this. I'm a little bit of a green stormwater infrastructure geek, and carry that with me wherever I go and try to connect people to resources. But Amy, is there anything more that you want to say about SEMCOG's role? Clearly, you're a convener with extraordinary talent to connect the people who can then act within their spheres of influence to make things happen. But I know you do so much more than just convene people to work on these projects. And so is there anything more that you can share with us about what SEMCOG's role is?
So I think the best way is to give an example. And one of the things that Jim mentioned is, we're not going to build ourselves out of this, right? The pipes that we have are for a 10-year rain event. Palencia is the engineer, right? And we're seeing 100-year events more and more. And we did some climate models that looked at the fact that by 2050, the 100-year event now is really going to be the 10-year event then. And whether we all agree on that and what it is, it's that the pipes aren't big enough. And so what we tried to do at SEMCOG is look at how do we get people together and rally around what we can do above ground. We've got the Great Lakes Water Authority and the local governments looking at the pipe system and a big study with the Army Corps of Engineers, but we're looking at what can we do above ground to hold that water, use nature, and how can we direct things into certain areas to help keep the flow out of the system. And that's what Jim was talking about. And it could be a small rain garden, but it could be a huge project, right? And so we did a group of people got together. We called ourselves Green, Growing Our Resiliency, Equity, and Economy with Nature. So how to use nature-based solutions. And that really has gotten a lot of traction. We set metrics for our region for how much tree canopy we want, how many wetlands to preserve and open spaces, but using those to funnel large-scale green infrastructure projects to manage some of this flow. And as a result of that kind of planning process with a lot of different people involved, just SEMCOG has received $6 million so far to either figure out where are those spots, and that was through the federal government. We received funding called Protect, but we also received funding from the Herb Family Foundation. Like they said, have been great partners with us. Put all those dollars together, also some dollars from MDOT, and we're going to figure out where do those spots look like and how do we get projects. We're not the project people. Palencia, Jim, they're the project people. But we really just try to bring people together, get the studies done, and help get the money into Michigan, into Southeast Michigan. And so that's, I think, one of the good examples. And the $6 million, that's one part of it, is to do that planning. But we also received $4.5 million from EPA to put in green infrastructure that we, as the regional agency, and it's nothing more fun than this, gets to pass through to the local governments doing a call for projects to implement green infrastructure. And so those are the kinds of things I think that make those regional convenings a real reality. You know, people don't want to convene and develop plans, as they say, to sit on the shelf. They want action. And so if we can convene people and get people rallied around a concept, in the last 2 years, I have never heard people talk about large-scale green infrastructure more ever in my life than we have now. And we're going to do it. And we're going to be successful because we're all rallied around some of those key issues. And I think that's one of the ways SEMCOG has a role.
Yeah. It's, I'm sorry, Palencia?
Yeah, I was just going to make the comment. I was invited to convene a session for a legislative body that shall remain nameless right now to talk about sustainability and climate resilience. And one of the things I talked about with this region in particular, I joke all the time, we created the modern day suburb, right? There's all these single family residential structures, not just in Detroit, right, throughout Southeast Michigan. And if you go to other cities, you will not see blocks and blocks of houses. You'll see a house, you know, maybe a 2-family, you know, or 4-family, maybe an apartment building mixed into the block. So the other thing we also have to do, not only preserve where we have open space, but change our thought patterns about residential development and what will make sense in the future. I'm obsessed with Singapore now. If no one has watched the Blue Zone project, I encourage people to watch it. But I'm so obsessed with Singapore right now, how they've done some of their development, how they've incentivized you know, family to stay adjacent to each other, right? That has a whole different, you know, slew of benefits. But again, how they've chosen to develop, even though they're highly impervious, right? They have large multi-story structures that integrate stormwater management. And it's probably one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. And so again, you know, here we're used to a house, a car, a driveway, you know, a house and a driveway, a house and a driveway, house and a driveway. And we're going to have to change our perception about what residential living looks like also. And then I have one other, you know, small request. Can we not develop things that have never been developed? Can we just develop where we've already developed? Because that would really help us manage this runoff. Like I make the joke, I don't make the joke, but you know, I use the saying all the time, I'm my brother's keeper. Right? We're going to have to stay next to each other, guys. Like we cannot keep moving further and further out. And everybody can't have a ranch. Everybody can't be a farmer, right? You know what I mean? Like we have got to begin to live closer to each other and understand what density means. And, you know, there are places, and I can't remember which state this is or which city it is, but there are people whose stormwater ordinances legislate down to 500 square feet of imperviousness. So if I was to build my house today, and I don't live in some ginormous house, right? Let's live in a small ranch, I would have to build stormwater management, right, to manage whatever my house generated. And so we're not there yet, right? Regionally, I don't think we've done that. But you have people building 10,000, 15,000, 20,000 square foot houses and have yet to think about what impact that rooftop, that driveway is going to have on generating stormwater runoff.
You know, don't you think that part of that, it's about vision, and it's about being able to understand the rewards of choosing something different. I think lots of times we just see the loss involved with choosing something that's different than what we're used to. You know, sometimes I joke that if I could wave a magic wand, I'd provide the resources for every single person to be able to travel just a little bit to see how people live in other places and are happy and thrive and have built wonderful lives, you know, with a slightly different model. I just wish everyone could see that potential, but that's my pontificating. But Jim, you know, I wanted to go to you because you know, the Oakland County Water Resources Commission is just huge. I mean, you know, the scope of responsibility, aren't you overseeing assets that top $60 billion. I mean,
Oh,
could you
absolutely.
talk a little bit about that?
Well, that's why, most offices like mine are called drain commissioners, because they do storm drains. That's pretty much what they do. Some of them have 2 or 3 employees. I have almost 400 employees. We operate and maintain for 23 communities. They're water and sewer services. Most of them we do billing for. So we operate and maintain these systems, and we are very, very familiar with how these operate and what the needs are. I'll take Pontiac. Most of the ones we do are contract with those communities. So we, through contract, operate, maintain their systems. Pontiac, we actually own the system. We was turned over to us for 30 or 40 years. And when we took it over from a privatized water service company, they had not for some years done any kind of planning, any kind of long-term, anything to replace the infrastructure. So when we took it over, we discovered that about 72 or more % of the water and sewer infrastructure under that city was between 80 and 120 years old, way past its life expectancy. So we're in this process, first of all, of replacing this infrastructure. Some of it we have to replace with bigger infrastructure because, again, the storms are getting bigger. But most of these systems over the past 100 years were built with federal dollars. Detroit, Pontiac, all those systems were not built by the local folks. And the money dried up to repair them back in the 80s and 90s, and we haven't had income other than our own ratepayers for decades. So we, with what SEMCOG tells us, we need to spend the whole region about $3 billion a year for 20 or 30 years. We just can't put all that on the ratepayers. We've had this relief in the past few years of federal dollars finally coming. Some of them are loans, but a lot of them are for, especially our overburdened communities, are actually principal forgiveness loans, which we desperately need. And we've been using that. We've gotten some for lead lines. Just in Pontiac, we're looking to replace lead lines between $60 and $80 million. If we do it in the 10 years that Eagle says to do it, and we try to do it with, revenue, that's a 40% increase in rates to those communities that already have an affordability problem. We can't afford to do all that all on the backs of the ratepayers. And so we need federal funding. There's been talk, we've gotten some. Pontiac, I think, has already gotten close to $10 million towards that 60, 80 million. But the rest is, plus we don't have the people. We need workforce development in a huge way just for that one project. There's 8,000 lead lines to replace in Pontiac out of 20,000 customers, 60,000 in population. If we have to do that in 10 years, I don't know how people are going to afford their water. Plus replace this infrastructure that we have to keep replacing, or we're going to have more water main breaks, more, sinkholes from sewer lines. So all of that needs federal funding. If this just dries up in the next few years, we're going to be in real trouble. Many states really don't have lead lines in any significant way, but we do in Michigan, especially in Southeast Michigan. My city, Farmington Hills, has none. Pontiac has 8,000. So it just depends on where you are that how the systems were built and when they were built. But we still have issues around that. Great Lakes Water Authority is now looking to significantly increase their corrosion control, which will help with our testing, will help less likely to folks to get waterborne lead. But we still need to replace these things. So we're going to need a lot of federal help, state help, whatever help we can get. Affordability programs can really help that, but we're still going to need that help to get these things paid for in the long run. And we're bifurcating right now. Are we going to invest, or are we going to quit investing? This election is going to kind of go that way somewhat, but we need to recognize that this investment is desperately needed all over the country, not just here, but for us in particular. Extreme weather is going to be one of those things that we're getting from climate change, because we're a heat sink, and it's going to, that warmed up atmosphere can carry more moisture until it hits us, and then it's going to release it on us.
Mhm.
So that's droughts west of us and south of us and more rain than we can deal with here. And that's part of what we're going to have to deal with. Both are going to need federal assistance, whether it's helping with droughts or helping with too many floods.
You know, you all have done an amazing job of helping us understand how complex this issue is and how action is needed on many fronts. I think you've also given us, or certainly you've given me, a lot of hope to see the collaboration that, SEMCOG is providing this base for, but that you are leading, by example of, all of us working together to solve the challenges. And we've heard quite a bit about the scope and scale of the challenges. Um, I guess I'd like to close in the few minutes we have left with a question about what are the opportunities that you see? Again, Palencia, you mentioned this a little bit at the beginning when you talked about what the capacity was and that we have the water capacity to attract new industries to our area. What are the opportunities around economic growth in creating a water sustainable future for Southeast Michigan?
So I think one key component, right, is us continuing to break down the barriers around regional collaboration coordination. Another key component, and this is something I've been advocating for, is oftentimes there's nobody on economic development committees that understands infrastructure. And so we will attract, we're going to put this here, we're going to do that there, we're going to put, and something, gets to your desk and you're like, who said that? Right? Because we don't have the water or sewer or power or gas, none of the utilities really can make this happen, right? So we're scrambling and the business is looking at you like, well, what do you mean? And so we're all trying to figure it out. The burden for development also shouldn't be on ratepayers. So there also needs to be a better conversation around how we plan economic development, attraction, activities and land use activities. But again, I think continuing to have this regional collaboration coordination is important. And then the Michigan Infrastructure Council, the work that we are doing to put out the 30-year infrastructure asset management strategy is critical. It's going to help people understand the different cycles of funding. SEMCOG is one of our regional centers that will be helping some of the smaller communities get their assets and their projects into the infrastructure portal that we've created. So we've done something so people can see where things align. So if Great Lakes Water Authority, needs to do a large water main infrastructure project, out in North Oakland County, Jim may have, something he needs to do from a sewer perspective in the same corridor. Sewer and water don't run at the same depths. But again, could we be in the same general area and just tear this road up one time? How do we coordinate and stack the funding? What I think is going to be critical, and there's a colleague of mine I met through some work with the Asthma Institute, who is brilliant when it comes to what I call capital stacking of infrastructure projects. So there's a project in Hoboken, New Jersey, and it's very unique. It has 4 different funding streams that come at different times, right? They don't all come at the same time. It's a 10-year project. And it was a 10-year project from ideation to implementation. But one of the stacks in there was municipal parking revenue. Why? Because they built a park on top of what would be a parking structure. And so the revenue from the parking could be used to bond to do the project. And the parking structure can flood because it was built to be made resilient. And the last stack of money that came in was FEMA brick funding. Now, was there some work that had to happen from a water perspective to get the utility to understand like how this project could be so much more than just the infrastructure project? Sure, because they want to go buy 2 flood pumps, right? Like, oh, we can just buy 2 $5 million flood pumps. But once the conversation began about how this would have economic activity around it, how it could increase, tax base, and how it was also being resilient and preparing for the future, it changed even the utilities perspective. So they were able to bring in 4 funding streams. And I think, again, we're going to have to talk about projects in all their little components to assess every potential pot of funding that might be out there to ensure we're doing holistic project development and sustainable development.
Thank you. Jim, how about you?
You know, I am really optimistic. I think people, we're lucky in Michigan, just average Michiganders care about water. When you talk about water quality, things like that, people in Michigan are more aware of that than anywhere else I've ever lived. I've lived all over the country, and it's in the Great Lakes are in our blood, are on our hearts. We just know water. So when things like back in '99, there was a ballot initiative for a $4 billion fund to do water work. It passed like 73%, I mean, overwhelmingly passed. And I work a lot with young people from 4th and 5th grade, high school, college, young engineers. And we have young people that are just focused on this like I've never seen in my life. And I was always one of these environmental wackos that was doing all this stuff. But young people are just way more aware of climate change, that they're going to need to do something about it personally themselves. And I just feel that we have a huge number of incredibly brilliant young people that are really focused on this, and they're going to bring that into their lives. And I think that's going to make a real change in just how we view these things, and a willingness to actually invest and work towards this. I just see it in a way that I haven't seen it in earlier in my life. And I just think it's something that's really makes a difference. I saw a 5th grader who gave a speech for my nonprofit, Pure Oakland Water, and I had to follow the kid up. And I was amazed. He had this written out speech, but he never looked once down. His mind is going to do something wonderful one day. And I just feel that there's tons of people like that in this generation they're just going to make a huge difference. And I feel good about that.
Love it. Okay, Amy, take us away. Close us out here.
Well, I would say for your primary audience, the private sector, I think it's an untapped resource for us when we do the work that we need to do. We are the economic development district for our region as well. So we look at the economic vitality of Southeast Michigan, and we know that public-private partnerships are needed in water infrastructure like never before. We're talking about needing to build large-scale green infrastructure, and how can the private sector help us meet those flooding challenges? I think there's a definite role for the private sector there. We, talk to Great Lakes Water, and they say, we do have room, like Palencia said, in our system. We should be able to cite more water industry to come into Southeast Michigan. So there's an opportunity there for the private sector. We're the Great Lakes state, right? And placemaking is so important. When we ask people that could live anywhere, they want to choose where they live first, and then they figure out where the job is. And so we all need to be more cognizant than ever before about the importance of place. And water in our Great Lakes and our rivers and streams are so important. As Jim said, it's born in us, right? And that's why people come here. So we got to keep them clean, and we've got to have it not all be flooded, right? And so the private sector is a big part of the placemaking side of Southeast Michigan. And then I think the last thing is really, I think we all in the public sector need to better understand what the private sector wants. And you all have your sustainability plans and ESG plans and goals. How can what we're trying to do for the region connect better with all of that? So I think there's a huge opportunity for you, Terry, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak on what we do, because I think we can connect more with the business sector and try and make this region even better. So thank you.
Well, I just want to say that we all appreciate each one of you and your organizations for your leadership and your vision and everything you're doing. Thank you, Amy O'Leary, Palencia Mobley, and Jim Nash, for joining us today on the Green Stream.
Thank you for tuning in to the Sustainable Business Network Detroit, the Green Stream podcast. Remember to like, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts. Make sure to follow us on SBN-Detroit.org and stay tuned for more conversations on sustainability from inside and around the city.